Sommerteeth Jones is on the hunt. Today his target is an old abandoned contract town. Well, it was mostly abandoned, but he figures the city folks he encountered on his way in aren't going to mind him taking a few things, since they ran off after he started letting off shots from his boomstick. He picks out the most important looking building in town. It looks like a place those Union folks might hang out. Ma was always bragging that the Union folks had some good loot. Maybe he'd find something impressive enough to shut her up for good. He heads inside, only to find that it's full of nothing but paperwork and dust. He knocks a few things over in frustration, and when he turns to leave, he jumps in surprise at the massive figure that's standing in the doorway. He quickly realizes that it's his son, Lenny. "Boy, you almost scared me half to death. What in the hell are you doing out here anyway?" Sommer demands, as he approaches his son, anger apparent on his face. Lenny looks down at the much smaller gremlin. Well, you see, my piglet wanted to go on an adventure, so I thought I'd follow you," Lenny stammers out. No sooner had Lenny finished explaining, Sommer buries his finger in the larger gremlin's chest. "Boy, you got no business following me out here. I told you to stay home. Now get the hell out of my way." Sommer tries to force his way past Lenny, who's still blocking the door, but the hulking figure doesn't budge, and Sommer loses his footing and tumbles to the ground. He expects to bounce off a wall, but instead he hears a crunch as some of the wooden boards give way, leaving a gremlin-sized hole. Sommer collects himself, dusting off his clothes, and then looks up at Lenny a little embarrassed. "See what you did, boy? I told you to get out of my way." But his voice trails off, as he notices that the hole in the wall seems to lead to a secret room. He climbs through the hole to find himself in a small dark room, full of spider-like robotic constructs, crates, and paperwork. Lenny struggles to follow his father inside, as he can't fit quite so easily through the small hole. Once he does, he sees his father standing wide-eyed and mouth agape. "Look at all this loot. Isn't it purty?" Sommer says, clearly in awe. Lenny looks around confused, as Sommer starts making his way around the room, inventorying all the plunder in his new find. After several minutes, Sommer stands in front of one of the smaller constructs and yells out to Lenny, "Boy, get over here and give me a hand with this." But when he turns to look, Lenny is preoccupied looking through a stack of paperwork. As Sommer approaches, he holds out several of the loose pieces of paper, offering them to his father. I think you should have a look," he says timidly. Sommer peers down at the paperwork, a mix of anger and surprise on his face, and then snatches it out of his son's hand. "Didn't you hear me? I told you to come over—" But he stops mid-sentence, his eyes focused on the papers in front of him. "Well, ain't that something?" he says, looking back up at Lenny. Colette sits in front of her vanity, fixing her makeup and deeply lost in thought. It's such a relief that they're taking the night off from smuggling, leaving her and her girls to only focus on the show. Tonight, they'll be debuting a few new tricks. After all, they have to keep the interest of the public in order to keep the tickets selling. She's just putting on the finishing touches when she hears a knock at her door, and she doesn't turn to look, but already knows it's Cassandra, as the woman takes a step inside the room. "Sorry to bother you, boss, but we have an unexpected guest who's asking for you." Colette closes her eyes for a few seconds, and then opens them again. "Well, you know better than that. Now's no time to be seeing guests. The show starts in 15 minutes. Cassandra starts to explain, but she's cut off as another figure pushes its way inside the room. Colette turns around and recognizes the man as Joss, a member of the Union and one of Ramos's most loyal henchmen. This could be trouble. She stands up and waves for Cassandra to leave them, as Joss looks around the room casually. "Good to see you, Colette. How are things in the theater business these days?" "Oh, you know me and my girls. We always make do," Colette responds, while eyeing the man, trying to figure out what his angle is. A soulstone suddenly appears in Colette's hand, and she flips it around, balancing it on the back of her hand, and then rolling it down her arm. This was partially a forced habit from all of her time working in showbiz, and partially to show Joss that she's always got a trick up her sleeve. "I've heard that the shows are selling pretty well lately," Joss calls back, his eyes now focused on the woman in front of him. Colette's pleasant expression fades, and her voice grows more stern. "Well, if you're here because you're interested in the show, then maybe I can arrange for you to get a few last-minute tickets for tonight. Otherwise—" And her voice trails off, clearly implying that he should get to it or get out. "Ah, always business with you, huh?" Joss replies. "Well, if that's the case, we have something important to talk about." Colette cocks an eyebrow, as if asking for him to go on. "You might know that I've been working with a new crew, trying to disable some of the traps that Ramos left for us. The old man kept himself pretty busy before he got locked up." Colette looks at her fingernails as if out of boredom. "Yes, and what about it?" "Well, you see, at first it was just some constructs and some mutilated people. But we think we may have found something quite a bit more interesting." Joss pulls out a folder and slowly approaches Colette and hands it to her. The woman opens it and flips a few pages, and after several minutes of silence, she looks up at Joss. "Well, I have to say this isn't what I was expecting." Pandora was frustrated. Between the voices coming out of her box and the chaos caused by the arrival of the Burning Man, she was finding it more and more difficult to have any fun. It's so boring. She stands in a dark alley, over the body of a man. He's physically fine, but mentally he's completely broken. As Pandora tries to savor the last few minutes of his agony, she suddenly finds herself standing inside the box, looking up at herself. "Such bad luck," a sinister voice whispers in her ear. Pandora refused to respond. The being inside the box was not her friend, not an ally. Sometimes the enemy of your enemy could be your enemy too. The voice speaks again. You know, you might be able to get us out of all of this. The tyrant Fortune taunts her. Pandora again refuses to respond, but Fortune goes on. There's many things I could teach you, some of which you might find very interesting. The Neverborn woman thinks about it, and decides she's intrigued. If nothing else, talking to this being will at least alleviate her boredom. What are you talking about? She replies. The malevolent voice comes back. Take, for example, the human Victor Ramos. Now there's a man who had incredible luck, until, of course, his luck ran out. Yuko Hamasaki loved to play mahjong. In truth, Yuko loved any game that allowed her to show off her intellect, but mahjong held a special place in her heart. The beautiful yet simple design of the tiles were especially appealing to her, and she found the tactile nature of the game satisfying. So naturally, she was an expert at it. Many nights after closing up shop, Yuko and some of the other girls would stay late to play, and Yuko would often go easy on them, in hopes that they wouldn't get frustrated. But this week she's not playing at all. She stands in the corner watching the other girls, as she's found herself preoccupied for the last few days. The union members were usually pretty tight-lipped. Of course, not when it came to things like gossip and politics. After a few drinks, most of them clucked like hens, but not when it came to the important stuff. Considering the scope of her information network, Yuko couldn't decide if she was more surprised how long it took for this information to get to her, or how easily she had acquired it, having overheard a fairly casual conversation between two high-level union members. But either way, something big was going on, and she decides that she needs to go speak to the Oyabun. She makes her way to the Katanaka trading house, and though she hadn't spoken to the Oyabun in a while, and if the rumors were to be believed, no one had, someone of her status ought to be able to get an audience. After being escorted inside, Yuko enters a room where she finds two charm warders whispering spells, and Masaki in the middle of the room, apparently in the middle of a heated conversation. Yuko looks at her puzzled, as she seems to be speaking to no one in particular, and as she approaches, the Oyabun snaps out of it and greets her warmly. Yuko, it's great to see you. I'm told that you have something urgent. Yuko bows politely and nods. It seems Ramos may have had more secrets than we ever thought, Yuko replies. 20 minutes later, she walks out of the Oyabun's chambers and heads off to pursue her new assignment. A showgirl named Betty, dressed in plain clothes, walks down the street in the industrial zone. She walks with a purpose, though it's a cool and pleasant evening, and as the sun goes down, it casts shadows across the buildings and the street. But one shadow in particular seems a bit out of place. As she approaches her destination, she repeats words to herself under her breath, determined not to leave anything out of her report. Upon entering Union Hall, she finds herself just in time for her meeting with the president. 30 minutes later, Betty leaves the building, noticeably more relaxed. As she makes her way back towards downtown, the same mysterious shadow slinks across the street. On a nearby bench, English Ivan looks out over Industry Station as Mr. Mordrake creeps up and reattaches to the man. Ivan thinks for a minute about the new information he's acquired, and he doesn't let his expression reveal his surprise and curiosity. He then stands up and heads back to the Hollow Marsh pumping station. On his arrival, he walks past all the union members, through the station and into the wash house, and then out the back door. He looks up at the giant wall of rotating mechanisms and gears, and then checks his watch before stepping onto a rising cog. He then makes a series of precise movements in order to avoid being squished, a routine that he had gotten so used to by now that he almost doesn't have to tap his foot to keep time. When he steps off the last gear, he finds himself on a rock wall deep in the mountain and looks up at a door with a sign that reads Department of Ungentlemanly Affairs. When he walks inside, he finds Eva Havenhand and Gibson DeWalt. The man looks up at him and says, "Well, it's about damn time you got here." Ivan, who had previously been smiling pleasantly, suddenly frowns and shoots DeWalt a dirty look. "Language, please." Havenhand then looks over. "What seems to be going on? You told us it was urgent." Ivan looks over both of his associates, and then explains, "I have some new information. It's a great opportunity, but we'll have to move quickly." Sonia Crid sits in her office, poring over piles of books and paperwork. She'd been at it for hours, and as the sun went down, she'd lit a gas lamp, which now casts an eerie glow across the room. Having been at it for so long, she suddenly slams a book closed and rubs her eyes, exasperated. When Governor General Kitchener had died, Lucius Matheson had cracked down on the Union, arresting its members and confiscating tons of intel. With all the chaos that had gone on since then, she hadn't had an opportunity to properly review it all. And when Ramos was arrested, they'd found even more information to add to the backlog. Crid had been surprised that even though Ramos seemed fixated on whatever he had been doing up in the mountains, he had still had time to do some research on the Burning Man. They needed all the help they could get now that the Burning Man had come to Malifaux. But as she started reviewing the documents, she started finding hints, little breadcrumbs, clues towards something bigger, something that Ramos was hiding, and it seems that almost no one in his organization was aware of it. As Crit racks her brain to try to figure out what she could have missed, she starts to consider that secret information like this wouldn't have been in the hands of any low-level operatives, and she finds her attention wandering back to Ramos's personal journal. She had taken it off his body the day she arrested him, and she opens it up to find the same mundane scheduling and logistical information that she had already reviewed several times. Periodically throughout the journal, Ramos had made various sketches, some of which included his trademark, the symbol that he used to mark his work. As Crid's eyes start to go crossed from fatigue and lack of sleep, she suddenly notices that one of these symbols seems to be pointing to 2 letters in the alphabet. As the realization slowly dawns on her, she suddenly sits bolt upright and flips through the pages of the journal, counting the symbols. 26. The symbols pointed to a substitution cipher. Somewhere in Ramos's writing, there was hidden information. Hannah Lovelace heads to the Free Corps headquarters in the town of Freehold and goes into Von Schill's office. She hears the man coughing up a storm. He had only just barely survived the sickness after Hamlin and Plague recently attacked the town, and the man still wasn't up to full strength. As she approaches, he steadies himself and looks up at her. "Where do we stand?" Hannah puts a file on his desk. "Recruitment is up, and training is going well. It seems we're on pace to replenish our forces in the time frame you laid out, though it's going to be expensive." Von Schill waves a hand dismissively. "It doesn't matter. We don't have any other choice." "What about everybody else in the settlement?" Hannah looks off into the distance, deep in thought. "Well, the Victorias seem to be coming back around, after their run-in with Titania. And Tara, well, Tara's always just Tara. And Leviticus seems to be spending more time in the city. It seems all the chaos from the Burning Man is actually good for his business." "Yeah, well that makes one of us," Von Schill shoots back. "Has anyone heard from Plague since the incident?" Hannah flips through another file that she's carrying. "Well, we've been keeping our ears to the ground, but so far it seems like he's laying low. Maybe we did more damage than we thought," Hannah replies. "We can only hope," the old man says with a dejected look on his face. He pauses, remembering everything that they've gone through since settling this town. Soon, Hannah pulls him out of his thoughts. "But boss, I'm here because I have some more pressing news. It seems that something's going on in the city." Von Schill thinks for a second, and then replies, "Yeah, of course something's going on in the city. It's been all manner of chaos since the Burning Man showed back up." No, Hannah cuts him off. "There's something else. It seems that everyone's looking for something. The Guild, the Union. Rumor has it the Explorer Society is even in on it. But we haven't been able to figure out exactly what it is." Von Schill's expression softens. "Well now, you do know that I hate being left out." In a room deep in the sewers, Dr. McMorning stands over a partially completed flesh construct and admires his work. As he looks over the assembled parts, he suddenly realizes that the hands don't seem to match the body. "I would have sworn I had a bigger pair around here somewhere." McMorning digs through one of the piles of body parts that are scattered around the room, before returning to the table and lifting up the cadaver's leg in his search. "Someone must have stolen them. Could it have been that blasted chihuahua that follows me around? No, certainly not. It must have been Sebastian. He's been trying to ruin my best work for years now." McMorning thinks to himself before he is interrupted by the sound of a thud behind him. He spins around quickly, wielding a disembodied arm like a sword. "Who's there?" Out of the darkness comes his assistant, Sebastian, holding a large sack over one shoulder. "We got a big haul today, boss," he announces as he approaches McMorning. McMorning awkwardly pulls a sheet over the feet of the cadaver on his table, as if to hide them. He isn't going to let this kleptomaniac take all the good parts. Sebastian starts unloading body parts out of his bag, piling them onto a nearby table, and when he runs out of room, he starts piling them on top of the body. With every piece he puts on the body, McMorning picks it up and throws it on the floor. This lab might be a bit of a mess, but there's no reason to be untidy. "Well, this one was interesting," Sebastian states as he holds up a disembodied head of a middle-aged man. "Not really," McMorning replies, as he takes the head and throws it into the pile. "He told me there was something going on in the city. Everyone seems to be searching for some mysterious object, or a treasure or some such, supposed to be left by Dr. Ramos before he got arrested." The squat man holds out a folded piece of paper towards the doctor. McMorning waves him off. "That's not our concern. Small hands now that's our concern." And he turns back to busy himself with his creation. Sebastian looks down at his hand self-consciously, and then looks back up at Dr. McMorning. "Might be something that could help you get that Lady Justice off your back for good, if and we found it." Dr. McMorning pauses, and then quickly turns around. "Gimme that!" He snatches the piece of paper out of Sebastian's hands and opens it, and soon a manic smile spreads across his face.